The bridge of the Dawn's Edge hummed with quiet activity as Captain Jake Morrison stared at the encrypted message that had just arrived from Earth. His navigator Lisa Park watched him carefully as his face went pale, the color draining away like water from a broken dam. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez looked up from his console while Communications Officer Amy Carter waited for orders that seemed frozen in Jake's throat. The message contained only coordinates and a single word that made Jake's hands shake. Exodus to 3,000 light-years away, beneath the Rocky Mountains of Earth. Director Pete Hamilton stood in a control room that officially did not exist. The facility stretched for miles underground, carved from solid rock and shielded from every known form of detection. Banks of quantum computers lined the walls, their soft blue glow reflecting off Hamilton's weathered face as he watched the final. Preparations for humanity's greatest gamble project Looking Glass had been humanity's most closely guarded secret for 50 years. The technology allowed humans to peer into parallel dimensions and possible futures, scanning thousands of potential timelines to see what lay ahead. What they had discovered changed everything about humanity's place in the universe and their plans for survival. Dr. Helen Cross walked over to Hamilton, her tablet showing the latest quantum scan results. She had been the lead scientist who perfected the Looking Glass technology, spending decades learning how to navigate the maze of possible futures that branched out from every moment. Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed the weight of what they had learned. In 847 out of 1,000 possible timelines, the Galactic Council declared humanity a Class 5 extinction threat within the next 5 years. The Council consisted of 12 ancient alien races who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, viewing humans as dangerous newcomers whose rapid technological advancement threatened their established order. In those timelines where the Council made their declaration, humanity was completely wiped out within a decade. General Rick Hayes entered the control room, his uniform bearing no insignia that would identify his true role in humanity's secret preparations. For 20 years, he had been coordinating the most complex evacuation in history, moving human populations to hidden colonies in distant star systems using technology the Council did not know existed. His latest report showed that 89% of Earth's population had already been quietly relocated. The evacuation had been a masterpiece of planning and deception. Engineer Tony Blake had developed quantum tunneling drives that could move ships across vast distances without creating the energy signatures that Council sensors could detect. The drives worked by briefly shifting ships into parallel dimensions where the laws of physics allowed faster-than-light travel without the massive energy releases that traditional, faster-than-light drives produced. Dr. Karen White had perfected terraforming technology that could transform hostile worlds into livable homes in months rather than the centuries that traditional methods required. Her atmospheric processors could break down toxic gases and replace them with breathable air, while her soil generators could create fertile ground from lifeless rock, and sand. Coordinator Ben Thompson managed the incredible logistics of moving 12 billion people across the galaxy without anyone noticing. He had created false identities, fake travel records, and dummy colonies that would fool even the most advanced Council surveillance systems. Every transport ship appeared to be heading to known human colonies while actually delivering passengers to secret worlds that did not appear on any Council star charts. The deception had required humanity to act as if they were still a primitive species barely capable of interstellar travel. Human diplomats continued their careful negotiations with Council representatives, while human merchants traded in approved goods along established shipping routes. All the while, the greatest migration in galactic history was happening right under the Council's collective noses. Back on the Dawn's Edge, Jake Morrison finally found his voice and ordered his crew to begin immediate departure preparations. Lisa Park plotted a course that would take them to the emergency rendezvous point, while Danny Rodriguez began shutting down all non-essential systems to reduce their energy signature. Amy Carter sent coded messages to other human ships in the sector, using the predetermined signals that would tell them to begin their own emergency departures. The quantum scanning had revealed that the Council's decision was triggered by humanity's rapid expansion and technological development. In the timelines where humanity was destroyed, the Council became aware of human quantum scanning technology and realized that humans had been watching them for decades. The Council viewed this as proof that humanity was planning an attack and responded with immediate extermination orders. The irony was not lost on Hamilton and his team. Humanity's attempts to protect themselves by learning about future threats had created the very situation they were trying to avoid. The Council's fear of human technological advancement was based on accurate information about human capabilities, but the Council had completely misunderstood human intentions. Dr. Cross showed Hamilton the latest scans from the Council's home systems. Massive fleet movements were already beginning, as the Council prepared to implement their final solution to what they called the human problem. Advanced warships were being pulled from frontier duties and reassigned to Earth-directed task forces. The timeline was accelerating faster than their most pessimistic projections had suggested. The evacuation ships were already reaching their destinations on worlds that had been selected and prepared over decades of careful planning. These worlds were located in star systems that appeared empty to Council sensors, but actually contained thriving human colonies protected by advanced stealth technology. The colonists had been preparing for years, building underground cities and developing self-sufficient societies that could survive without contact with Earth. Engineer Lisa Barnes had developed the stealth systems that kept the hidden colonies invisible to Council detection methods. Her quantum phase generators created fields that bent light and energy around the colonies, making them appear as empty space to any scanning technology the Council possessed. The systems required enormous amounts of power, but the colonies had been built around fusion reactors that could provide energy for centuries. As the last evacuation ships departed Earth's major cities, Hamilton watched the final phase of the operation begin. Automated systems would maintain the appearance of normal activity for several more days, broadcasting fake communications and operating basic infrastructure to prevent immediate detection of the evacuation. By the time the Council arrived, they would find cities that looked recently abandoned rather than systematically evacuated. The plan required perfect timing and flawless execution. If the Council discovered the evacuation too early, they might be able to track the departing ships to the hidden colonies. If humanity waited too long to begin the final phase, the Council fleets might arrive before the last humans could escape. Everything depended on the quantum scans being accurate about the timing of the Council's decision. Jake Morrison's ship was among the last to leave human space, carrying a cargo of scientists and engineers whose knowledge would be crucial for the hidden colonies. As the Dawn's Edge entered quantum tunnel space, Jake looked back at the star system that had been humanity's home for millions of years, knowing that they might never return. The humans had vanished quietly, leaving behind only empty cities and the mystery of where 12 billion people could disappear to without a trace. Supreme Commander Veltar of the Zeridian Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching Earth grow larger on the main display screen. His tactical advisor, Subcommander Krixna, moved between monitoring stations while Science Overseer Thulvin checked readings from the advanced scanning equipment that filled the science bay. The Council fleet had arrived at humanity's home system, expecting to find resistance or signs of desperate evacuation, but instead they found something far more disturbing. Earth's major cities showed no signs of life, but all the infrastructure remained completely intact. Power grids were still running, and transportation systems continued operating on automated schedules. Streetlights turned on and off according to day and night cycles, while traffic control systems directed vehicles that were no longer there. The cities looked like stage sets waiting for actors who would never return. Krixna reported that orbital scans showed no human life signs anywhere on the planet, but also no indication of violence or struggle. The methodical nature of the evacuation was becoming clear as they examined each empty city. Homes had been left clean and organized with personal belongings carefully stored or removed. Food supplies were depleted but not spoiled, and waste systems had been properly shut down to prevent environmental damage. The discovery terrified Veltar more than any military resistance could have. It meant that humans had not only known about the Council's plans, but had possessed the technology and organization to move 12 billion people without leaving any trace of where they had gone. The implications of such capabilities made Veltar question everything the Council thought they knew about human civilization. Thulvin's investigation teams found evidence that the evacuation had been planned and executed over a period of decades rather than weeks or months. Transport schedules showed careful rotation of populations, with some areas being evacuated years earlier, while others had been emptied only days before the Council's arrival. The level of coordination required for such an operation suggested technological and organizational capabilities far beyond what the Council had estimated. The empty cities revealed other disturbing details about human preparations. Hidden manufacturing facilities were discovered beneath major urban centers, containing equipment for producing advanced technology that the Council did not recognize. Assembly lines showed evidence of mass production, but all the finished products had been removed along with the technical specifications that would have revealed what had been manufactured. Subcommander Kriegsna discovered that humans had been conducting detailed surveillance of Council activities for much longer than anyone had suspected. Communication intercepts showed that humans possessed detailed information about Council military capabilities, political structures, and even the locations of secret facilities that were supposed to be unknown to outsider species. The surveillance network was so comprehensive that humans appeared to know more about some Council operations than the Council leadership itself. Meanwhile, flashbacks revealed how humanity had achieved this incredible feat of disappearing an entire civilization. Engineer Tony Blake had spent 15 years developing the quantum tunneling drives that allowed human ships to travel between star systems without creating detectable energy signatures. His breakthrough came when he realized that ships could briefly shift into parallel dimensions where the physical laws allowed faster travel without the massive energy releases that Council sensors were designed to detect. Dr. Karen White had revolutionized terraforming technology by creating atmospheric processors that could transform hostile worlds into habitable environments in a fraction of the time required by traditional methods. Her soil generation systems could convert lifeless rock into fertile ground, while her atmospheric scrubbers could remove toxic gases and replace them with breathable air mixtures. The technology allowed humans to establish livable colonies on worlds that other species would consider uninhabitable. Coordinator Ben Thompson had managed the incredible logistics of the evacuation by creating multiple layers of deception that fooled Council surveillance systems for decades. He established fake shipping manifests that showed human transports delivering goods to known colonies while actually carrying passengers to secret destinations. His team created false population records that made it appear as if human numbers were remaining stable even as billions of people were being quietly relocated. The evacuation had required enormous sacrifices from the human population. Families were separated for years as different groups departed at different times to avoid suspicion. People left behind everything they could not carry and started new lives on worlds that were often harsh and challenging. The colonists knew they might never see Earth again, but understood that their sacrifice was necessary for the survival of their species. Dr. Cross had led the scientific teams that selected and prepared the hidden colony worlds. Her quantum scanning technology allowed her to identify star systems that appeared empty to Council sensors, but actually contained planets suitable for human habitation. The selection process took years as each potential world had to be carefully evaluated for its ability to support large populations while remaining undetectable. The hidden colonies were protected by advanced stealth technology developed by engineer Lisa Barnes. Her quantum phase generators created fields that bent electromagnetic radiation around the colonies, making them invisible to virtually all known detection methods. The stealth systems required enormous amounts of power, but each colony was built around fusion reactors that could provide energy for centuries without maintenance. Veltar's investigation teams found evidence that humans had been preparing for eventual conflict with the Council for generations. Underground bunkers contained supplies and equipment for supporting large populations during extended periods of isolation. Manufacturing facilities showed signs of having produced defensive weapons and protective equipment, though all the finished products had been removed during the evacuation. The Council's xenolinguistics teams discovered human communication records that mentioned something called Protocol 7, but were unable to determine what this mysterious protocol involved. The references appeared in official documents and private communications alike, suggesting that Protocol 7 was widely known among human leadership, but kept secret from outside observation. The context indicated that Protocol 7 was some kind of contingency plan, but its specific nature remained unclear. Science Overseer Thulvin reported that the evacuation had been so thorough that even human waste products and garbage had been systematically removed or recycled. The cities showed no trace of the billions of people who had lived there just days earlier. The level of environmental cleanup suggested that humans had wanted to leave Earth in pristine condition rather than simply abandoned. As Veltar studied the reports from his investigation teams, he realized that the Council had not been hunting primitive prey, but had instead awakened something far more dangerous. Humanity's quiet disappearance demonstrated capabilities that challenged everything the Council believed about their own technological superiority. The humans had been watching from the shadows while the Council made their plans, and now 12 billion people had vanished into a galaxy that suddenly seemed much larger and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened on Nexus Prime with representatives from all 12 member species, gathering in the ancient assembly chamber. High Counselor Morthek of the Vorthak race called for order, while Defense Minister Zilona of the militaristic Kandari paced nervously behind her chair. Intelligence Chief Quendar of the telepathic Psinathi sat motionless, but his mental emanations betrayed deep concern that other telepaths in the chamber could sense. The reports from Earth had sent shockwaves through the Council leadership that threatened to destabilize their entire understanding of galactic politics. The systematic evacuation of 12 billion humans without detection suggested technological capabilities that exceeded Council estimates by several orders of magnitude. If humans possess such advanced stealth and transportation technology, what other surprises might they have prepared during their decades of apparent compliance with Council regulations? Morthek reviewed the intelligence reports with growing alarm. Human colonies that the Council had been monitoring showed signs of being elaborate deceptions designed to hide the true extent of human expansion. Manufacturing records indicated production levels that far exceeded the reported population numbers, while shipping manifests showed transport patterns that made no sense unless viewed as part of a massive misdirection campaign. Defense Minister Zilona argued for immediate galaxy-wide mobilization of all Council military forces. Her analysis suggested that humanity's evacuation was preparation for a coordinated attack on Council territories, and that delay would only give humans more time to prepare their offensive operations. She presented tactical projections, showing how human stealth technology could allow surprise attacks on critical Council infrastructure before anyone realized they were under assault. Intelligence Chief Quendar disagreed with the military assessment, but his alternative was even more disturbing. His teams had intercepted fragmentary human communications that suggested humans had been observing Council activities for much longer than previously suspected. References to detailed knowledge of Council military capabilities and political structures indicated a surveillance network that penetrated deep into supposedly secure Council operations. The debate intensified when xenolinguistics expert Dr. Yithalar presented her analysis of intercepted human communications. Multiple references to something called Protocol 7 appeared in both official documents and private messages, but the context provided no clear indication of what this protocol involved. The pattern of references suggested that Protocol 7 was a widely known contingency plan among human leadership, but one that had been carefully kept secret from outside observation. Archive Keeper Nethulos warned the Assembly about historical precedents for civilizations that had disappeared without explanation. Ancient records mentioned several species that had vanished from the galaxy, only to return generations later, with advanced technology and hostile intentions. The pattern suggested that forced disappearances were often preparation for eventual revenge campaigns against those who had driven them away. The discussion took a darker turn when Science Advisor Colvin presented evidence that humans possess technology for manipulating quantum fields in ways that Council science had only theorized about. Analysis of residual energy signatures from Earth showed patterns consistent with large-scale quantum tunneling operations that could explain how humans had moved such enormous numbers of people without detection by conventional sensors. As panic spread through the assembly chamber, Defense Minister Zilona made a desperate proposal that sent chills through even the most militant Council members. She suggested activating the Void Makers, ancient devices left behind by the galaxy's first civilization that were capable of sterilizing entire star systems. The weapons had been sealed, away for millennia due to their devastating power. But Zelona argued that the human threat justified their use. The proposal horrified many council members who understood the terrible destructive potential of the Voidmakers. Archive keeper Nethulos explained that the ancient devices were designed for threats that endangered the entire galaxy, and that their activation required following precise protocols that had been partially lost over the centuries. The risk of accidentally triggering galactic-scale disasters made the Voidmakers a weapon of absolute last resort. Meanwhile, on the hidden human colony of New Haven, colony leader Ben Parker received urgent reports from deep space monitoring stations. Sensors operated by Science Officer Kate Johnson detected massive energy buildups across Council space that matched theoretical signatures for ancient superweapons. Security Chief Ray Adams coordinated defensive preparations while Dr. Susan Blake monitored Council communications for any indication of their intentions. The human leadership on New Haven understood that they were witnessing the Council's descent into panic-driven decision-making. Director Pete Hamilton had predicted this scenario during the evacuation planning, warning that the Council's discovery of human capabilities would likely trigger increasingly desperate responses. The quantum scans had shown multiple timelines where Council fear led to the activation of planet-killing weapons that ultimately doomed both civilizations. Dr. Helen Cross worked frantically with her research team to analyze the energy patterns detected by their monitoring network. The signatures matched ancient progenitor technology that was supposed to have been safely sealed away eons ago. Her calculations suggested that the Council was attempting to activate weapon systems without fully understanding their function or the safety protocols required for their safe operation. The irony of the situation was not lost on the human leadership. They had evacuated Earth to avoid conflict with the Council, only to watch the Council prepare to deploy weapons that could threaten every living thing in the galaxy. The humans possessed detailed knowledge of progenitor technology from their quantum scanning research, but had no way to warn the Council without revealing their locations and capabilities. Back in the Council chambers, the debate reached a critical point when Intelligence Chief Quendar reported that his teams had successfully decoded additional references to Protocol 7. The fragmentary information suggested that humans had prepared for multiple contingencies, including scenarios where the Council would resort to planet-killing weapons. The implication that humans had anticipated and planned for the Council's most desperate measures sent new waves of fear through the Assembly. Archive Keeper Nethulos made one final attempt to prevent catastrophe by reading aloud the ancient warnings about Voidmaker activation. The progenitor texts clearly stated that the weapons were designed to contain threats from outside the galaxy and included multiple references to dimensional barriers that protected against entities called devourers. The warnings emphasized that improper activation could breach these barriers with consequences that would threaten all life in the galaxy. Defense Minister Zelona dismissed the ancient warnings as irrelevant superstition and called for an immediate vote on Voidmaker activation. The Council's fear of human capabilities overwhelmed their caution about ancient weapons they did not fully understand. As the vote proceeded, the Council prepared to trigger a command that would change the fate of every living being in the galaxy, while 12 billion humans watched helplessly from their hidden refuges. Archive Keeper Nethulos spent his final hours before the Council vote, frantically searching through the deepest vaults of ancient knowledge, hoping to find more complete records about the Voidmakers and their true purpose. The progenitor texts were thousands of years old and written in symbolic languages that required careful interpretation. But the fragments he could translate painted a terrifying picture of weapons that were never meant to be used against conventional threats. The progenitors had been the galaxy's first spacefaring civilization, spreading across star systems millions of years before any of the current Council species had developed technology. Their records spoke of a golden age of exploration and discovery that ended abruptly when something from outside the galaxy began consuming entire worlds. The entities they called devourers existed partially outside normal space and time, making them nearly impossible to fight with conventional weapons. The Voidmakers were not weapons in any traditional sense, but emergency systems designed to contain cosmic threats by creating dimensional barriers around the galaxy. The devices worked by manipulating space-time itself, to form protective boundaries that would prevent extra-dimensional entities from entering normal space. The progenitor warnings repeatedly emphasized that the Voidmakers should only be activated when facing existential threats from beyond the galactic rim. On New Haven, human scientists worked desperately to understand what the Council was preparing to unleash. Dr. Alan Foster led a team that included tech specialist Marie Collins and engineer Bob Williams in analyzing the quantum signatures detected by their deep space monitoring network. The energy patterns showed that the Council had located several Voidmaker installations and was attempting to activate them without understanding their true function. Dr. Helen Cross coordinated research efforts from the secret facility known as Prometheus Base, where she worked with physicist Dr. Carl Rodriguez and engineer Linda Thompson. Their quantum scanning technology allowed them to peer into possible futures, and what they saw filled them with horror. In every timeline where the Council successfully activated the Voidmakers, the devices created rifts in space-time that attracted the attention of entities that had been waiting beyond the galactic barrier for millions of years. Captain Jake Morrison commanded humanity's hidden fleet from the mobile command ship Freedom's Call, receiving reports from deep space observers stationed throughout the galaxy. Lieutenant Paul Gray monitored Council military movements while Sensor Officer Julia Martinez tracked the energy buildups around ancient progenitor sites. The data painted a clear picture of the Council's preparations for activating weapons they believed would destroy human colonies, but would actually doom every living thing in the galaxy. The human leadership faced an impossible choice between revealing themselves to warn the Council and allowing a catastrophe that would threaten all life. Director Pete Hamilton coordinated emergency meetings with colony leaders across dozens of hidden worlds, trying to find a solution that would prevent disaster without exposing humanity to immediate extermination by Council forces. Meanwhile, Supreme Commander Veltar oversaw the Council's final preparations for Voidmaker activation from his flagship orbiting the progenitor installation at Kepler Station. His technical teams had spent weeks attempting to decode the ancient control systems and bypass the safety protocols that prevented unauthorized activation. The work was made more difficult by the fact that progenitor technology operated on principles that Council science only partially understood. Science Overseer Thulven reported that the Voidmaker installations were far more complex than anyone had initially realized. Each device was connected to a galaxy-wide network through quantum entanglement links that would allow coordinated activation across multiple star systems. The network structure suggested that the progenitors had designed the system to work as a unified defense grid rather than individual weapons. Archive keeper Neth Ulos made one final desperate attempt to prevent activation by presenting newly discovered text that explicitly warned against using the Voidmakers to target threats within the galaxy. The progenitor record stated clearly that internal activation would destabilize the dimensional barriers that protected the galaxy from external entities. The warnings described previous civilizations that had misused similar technology and attracted the attention of cosmic predators that consumed entire galaxies. Defense Minister Zelona dismissed the warnings and ordered the activation sequence to begin, despite the protests of more cautious Council members. Her teams had identified several star systems where they believed human colonies might be hidden and targeted the Voidmakers at those locations. The decision was driven by fear and desperation, rather than tactical analysis, as the Council leadership had convinced themselves that immediate action was necessary to prevent human attacks. The first test activation took place in an unpopulated system near the galactic rim where the Council believed the risk of collateral damage would be minimal. The Voidmaker device at that location successfully fired, releasing energies that Council sensors could barely measure. But instead of simply destroying the target system, the weapon created something far more dangerous. Space-time itself began to warp and tear around the impact point, creating a rift that extended into dimensions beyond normal perception. Dr. Carl Rodriguez detected the dimensional breach immediately through quantum sensors that monitored space-time stability across the galaxy. His calculations showed that the rift was expanding and attracting attention from entities that existed in parallel dimensions. The breach was sending signals across dimensional boundaries that had been carefully sealed by progenitor technology millions of years earlier. Lieutenant Paul Gray reported that additional Voidmaker installations were powering up for coordinated activation while Sensor Officer Julia Martinez detected massive distortions in local space around each target system. The Council's test had been successful in their terms, but had actually triggered the exact scenario that the progenitors had designed their defenses to prevent. The human observers watched in horror as the Council prepared for full-scale activation of the Voidmaker network. Intelligence Officer Tom Davis monitored Council communications and reported that Defense Minister Zelona was ordering simultaneous strikes against 12 different star systems where human colonies were suspected to exist. The coordinated activation would create multiple breaches in the dimensional barriers that protected the galaxy. Archive Keeper Nethulo sent final warning messages to the Council leadership, quoting directly from progenitor texts that described the devourers as entities that consumed matter and energy, while existing partially outside normal spacetime. The warnings explained that the creatures were attracted to dimensional breaches and would begin entering the galaxy immediately after the barriers were compromised. As the Council fleet powered up their weapons for the coordinated strike, spacetime around the initial breach began showing signs of instability that extended far beyond the target system. Dr. Helen Cross calculated that a full network activation would create a cascade effect that would tear multiple holes in the galactic barrier, effectively announcing the galaxy's location to predators that had been waiting in the dimensional void for millions of years to find new feeding grounds. The first devourer emerged through the dimensional rift near Aegis Station, while Station Commander Kolthara watched in terror from the control room. The entity defied visual comprehension as it existed partially outside normal spacetime, appearing as a shifting darkness that warped reality around itself. Science Officer Yexandi tried to record sensor readings, but the instruments could not properly measure something that violated the basic laws of physics that governed normal matter and energy. Supreme Commander Veltar received the first reports from Aegis Station just as the Council fleet completed activation of the full Voidmaker network. Instead of destroying suspected human colonies, the coordinated activation had created 12 rifts in the dimensional barriers that protected the galaxy. Through each breach, entities that had waited millions of years for access to normal space began pouring into the galaxy like cosmic predators finally finding an undefended feeding ground. The Council's most advanced warships proved utterly useless against creatures that existed partially outside the dimensional framework that governed conventional weapons. Fleet Admiral Krixtor led the third battle group in a desperate attack against the first devourer, but the entity simply absorbed the energy from their weapons while continuing to consume everything around it. Entire squadrons of Council ships vanished without trace as the creature fed on matter and energy alike. Panic spread throughout Council space as reports came in of multiple devourers manifesting through different rifts across the galaxy. These entities moved through space by folding dimensions around themselves and could appear anywhere without warning. Traditional defensive strategies became meaningless when facing enemies that could ignore physical barriers and existed across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Captain Jake Morrison received emergency activation codes from Director Pete Hamilton and led the human fleet out of hiding for the first time since the evacuation began. The ships that emerged from concealment bore no resemblance to the primitive vessels that the Council had expected humans to possess. These craft were equipped with exotic technology, specifically designed to fight extra-dimensional threats based on decades of preparation for this exact scenario. Admiral Claire Adams commanded the human response from the battleship New Earth, coordinating attacks against multiple devourers simultaneously. The human fleet used quantum phase weapons developed by Dr. Karen White that could target entities existing across dimensional boundaries. The weapons worked by creating localized spacetime distortions that could damage creatures that existed partially outside normal reality. Dr. Helen cross-broadcast a message to the surviving Council leadership explaining that humanity had discovered evidence of the devourers during their quantum scanning experiments. The human evacuation had not been an escape from the Council, but preparation for defending the galaxy against threats that the Council did not know existed. Humanity had spent decades developing weapons and strategies specifically designed to fight extra-dimensional entities. The revelation that humans had been preparing to defend rather than attack sent shockwaves through the Council leadership. Intelligence Chief Quendar realized That every human action the Council had interpreted as aggressive preparation had actually been defensive preparation against threats that humanity had foreseen through their advanced technology. The Council's fear and paranoia had created the exact disaster that humans had been trying to prevent. Human forces led by General Rick Hayes and Fleet Commander Ben Parker coordinated desperate defensive actions around major Council population centers. The human quantum phase weapons could actually damage the devourers, but destroying the entities required sustained coordinated attacks that depleted enormous amounts of energy. Each battle was a race against time, as the devourers continued feeding and growing stronger, while human ships exhausted their exotic weapon charges. Dr. Helen Cross worked with Archive Keeper, Nethulos, and the few surviving Council scientists to develop a plan for resealing the dimensional rifts. The process required precise coordination between human quantum technology and the remaining functional progenitor devices that the Council had not damaged during their activation attempts. The work was complicated by the fact that the devourers were actively trying to prevent the rifts from being closed. Engineer Tony Blake led technical teams that included Dr. Carl Rodriguez and Dr. Susan Blake in modifying the void makers from weapons back into their original function as dimensional barrier generators. The modifications required understanding both human quantum technology and ancient progenitor engineering principles that had been partially lost over millions of years. The climactic battle took place around the largest dimensional rift where 3 devourers had merged into a single massive entity that threatened to consume entire star systems. Human Fleet Admiral Ben Parker coordinated attacks by over 200 human ships, while Dr. Cross and her team worked frantically to complete the modifications to the nearest Voidmaker installation. The human fleet paid a terrible price holding off the merged devourer while the scientists worked to seal the rifts. Ships commanded by captains like Mike Turner and Lisa Chen made suicide runs to keep the entity distracted, while other vessels led by commanders such as Steve Walsh and Karen Davis provided covering fire for the technical teams. Nearly half the human fleet was lost in the desperate defense of the galaxy they had been accused of threatening. Dr. Cross succeeded in reactivating the Voidmakers in their original defensive configuration, creating new dimensional barriers that began forcing the devourers back into the spaces between realities. The process required enormous energy, expenditures that drained power from across multiple star systems, but gradually the rifts began to shrink and seal themselves. The surviving Council leadership formally requested humanity's guidance in rebuilding galactic civilization after witnessing the scope of the disaster that their fear and prejudice had created. High Counselor Morthek acknowledged that the Council had been wrong about human intentions and capabilities, while Defense Minister Zilona resigned in disgrace over her role in triggering the catastrophe. Director Pete Hamilton established New Geneva Station as humanity's diplomatic outpost where human and Council representatives worked together to coordinate reconstruction efforts. The galaxy had been fundamentally changed by the crisis, with humanity no longer viewed as a threat but as protectors who had earned their place through sacrifice rather than conquest. The final scene showed Hamilton standing on the observation deck watching human and alien ships working together to establish refugee colonies for Council survivors whose worlds had been consumed by the devourers. The galaxy would take centuries to fully recover from the damage, but the crisis had taught both civilizations that their greatest threats came not from each other, but from their own fear of the unknown. Humanity's quiet disappearance had been wisdom rather than cowardice, and their return during the galaxy's darkest hour proved that true strength lay not in dominance, but in the courage to protect others when everything was at stake. The humans had vanished quietly but returned as heroes when the galaxy needed them most.